Looking up from studying for a geology exam, Shale Stevens looked out the dirty small window of his office. There they are, the iconic ivy-covered walls that have come to symbolize the pinnacle of academic learning in America. There are people who would kill to work with that look, he thought. An assistant professor position on the way to securing tenure at a prestigious Ivy League university, a good salary, a beautiful environment, surrounded by young students, and some of the brightest minds in the world, what's not to like? If only they knew, he shook his head ironically and returned to his work. Shale himself had similar rosy illusions when he received a job offer from the university. Now, almost 2 years later, he was deeply disappointed. First, the salary, which seemed very attractive until he learned how expensive it was to live in a city where an Ivy League university was located. With the high cost of living and his student loan repayment schedule, Shale found himself in a difficult position trying to maintain some kind of normal life. The only thing that saved him was that when he accepted the job, he managed to negotiate a position for his wife, Sylvia. She took a job in the vice chancellor's office as a special assistant, and the extra income allowed the couple to enjoy a few luxuries, such as a 2-room apartment closer to the university. But money wasn't Sheila's only source of dissatisfaction. The university evaluated its faculty on their teaching, research, and service to the university. For Shale, these demands meant a full course load every semester, as well as mentoring duties for several students. At the same time, he was expected to conduct innovative research, publish it in a prestigious peer-reviewed journal, and, in his spare time, serve on several university committees. The result of all these demands was that Shale worked over 60 hours a week every month of the school year. The summer holidays did not offer much relief. With the school year filled with teaching, mentoring, and committee work, the summer was the only time Shale could do research and write academic papers. One day, when he tallied up all the hours he worked, Shale was saddened to discover that he was earning less than $30 an hour. I would have been better off financially if I had gone to work straight out of college instead of going to graduate school, he thought ruefully. But he was always fascinated by the origins and development of the planet and loved the opportunity to share that excitement with others. He sighed and turned his attention back to the exam in front of him. The year will soon end, and he wanted to study for the final exam. Of course, he knew the subject area very well, but since the department had introduced a new textbook, Shale needed to make sure that his final exam covered the material in the textbook. This was another one of his annoying topics. The textbook required for the department was written by Dr. Gray, chairman of the Department of Geology. This was fair. The chairman was a recognized authority in his field, but Sheila was irritated by the fact that Gray published a new publication every 2 years. The changes in each new edition were minimal, but they prevented students from purchasing textbooks secondhand, which provided additional royalties for Professor Gray. This also meant that Shale had to redo his lectures and exams to suit the new textbook, adding yet another task to his already long list. A knock on his office door interrupted Sheila's concentration. Surprised, he looked at his calendar and was saddened to see that he had an appointment with a student. He sighed to himself in discomfort and said, "Come in." The door to his tiny office opened, and a beautiful blonde student poked her head through the door. "Is this the right time for us to meet, Professor Stevens?" she asked politely in a childish voice. It was not the best time, Shale thought, but meeting with students was an important part of his duties, so he controlled his irritation and motioned for the girl to enter. As she entered the office and sat down on the small sofa, he noticed that she was wearing an ankle-length skirt and a zip-up sweater for the cool spring weather. While she was getting settled, he tried to remember why Taylor Poindexter wanted to meet with him today. Shale looked at Taylor with mixed feelings. She was certainly an attractive young woman, and he knew that she must be smart enough to be accepted into the university. But as far as his course was concerned, she was a poor student, spending most of her time tweeting or checking her Facebook page. No wonder, he thought, that she was failing the course. "What can I do for you, Miss Poindexter?" he asked politely, although he was almost sure he knew the answer. Many students chose geology to fulfill their science requirement, believing that it would be easier than chemistry, biology, or physics. Shale was disappointed to learn that introduction to geology was commonly referred to as Jock's Rocks among students. Only after they were well into the semester did they realize the truth. The physical history of the planet is a difficult and demanding subject. As expected, Taylor quickly began listing her worries about the grades in his course and smug excuses for her performance. She then moved on to the main reason for her visit. "Isn't there something I could do to raise my grade, Professor Stevens?" she asked, blinking her eyes. "I really can't afford to fail your course." Shales suppressed his impatience and calmly said, "Actually, Miss Pondester, the best thing you can do is study the material a little more for the final. I know geology is not your passion, but it deserves more attention than you have given it so far. But there's so much to study, and besides, the final won't help my previous grades. Is there a special project I could do, maybe something for extra credit?" she asked flirtatiously. Then, to Shale's amazement, she slowly crossed her legs and the floor-length wrap skirt unfurled, giving him a full view of her leg. The black over the knee boots that were hidden by the skirt now drew his gaze up her legs. As he sat stunned by her audacity, she continued to move her legs, in the process revealing that her tight panties were bright red. She then reached down and casually unbuttoned her sweater low enough to reveal a matching red bra. "Are you sure there is nothing I could do to convince you to give me a better grade in your course, Professor?" she purred to him. Shale shifted uncomfortably in his chair, trying to find an answer, when the door to his office suddenly swung open and two young women appeared on the threshold. Shale looked up to see his graduate student and her roommate smirking at him. "Shouldn't we have discussed the lesson plan, Professor Stevens?" the blonde asked in a sly tone. "What? Oh yes, Anika, you're right, I forgot," Shale muttered gratefully. Turning to the student seated on his sofa, he quickly said, "Sorry, Miss Pondester, but there seems to be a timing misunderstanding. We will have to reschedule the meeting." Taylor quickly gathered up her skirt and buttoned up her sweater. She stood up abruptly, glaring angrily at the two women in the doorway. "Okay, Professor, but I would still like to do something for extra credit, so let me know." Then she barely squeezed past two women, apparently unhappy that her plans were thwarted. When she left, Shale breathed a sigh of relief. "It's so good that you came on time. This woman tried to seduce me to get a better grade. Never before has a student tried to bribe me with sex." Now the two women started laughing loudly and Shale looked at them suspiciously. "Okay, what's so funny?" he asked. Anika Mortensen, the blonde of the two and his graduate student, smiled widely. "Okay, let's admit it. I noticed on your calendar that Taylor had an appointment for today and thought you might need rescuing. She has a reputation for trying to sleep with teachers to get better grades." Mosa Pinar, Anika's roommate, chimed in, "Yes, and rumors on campus say she's already had success with a few professors. That's why we decided that you need salvation." "So you set me up," Shale said, crossing his arms in mock anger. "The least you could do is warn me about it in advance." "What, and miss the chance to see your embarrassed face?" Mosa asked happily. "Not to mention you had a noticeable bulge in your pants," she added with a grin. Shale looked down at himself and quickly sat down at his desk, embarrassed. Trying to hide his confusion, he hastily continued, "Well, still, I'm glad you came on time. It's scary to meet such a predator face to face," he said with a smile. As the laughter died down, his expression became more serious. "Now, if we really don't have anything to discuss, get out of here and let me finish reviewing this material. I need to finish and get home in time to get myself in order. There's a faculty reception at the president's house tonight, and I can't be late." With smiles and waves, the two women walked away, still chuckling, and Shale couldn't help but smile after them. Anika was assigned to him at the beginning of the school year and was much more helpful than he expected. She taught introductory geology labs in preparation for her doctorate and also helped him grade papers and advise some students. Shale found her smart, talented, and pleasant to talk to. And I must admit, with her long blonde hair and slender figure, She was very pleasing to the eye. Overall, Shale concluded her fiancé was a very happy man at home. Sheila was also interested in watching the relationship between Anika and her neighbor Mosa. Due to a shortage of housing for graduate students, they were accidentally placed together. Besides the fact that they were both extremely attractive and intelligent, they had almost nothing in common. As her platinum hair suggested, Anika was of Swedish descent and originally from Minnesota. In contrast, Mosa, who was working toward a master's degree in business administration, was from South Africa. With her hazel-brown complexion, cropped black hair, and curvier figure, she stood in stark contrast to Anika. And yet, despite their differences, they became close as sisters, and it was so common to see them together that they began to be called salt and pepper on campus. Putting thoughts of the two young women aside, Shale returned to his exam. "I need to be on time today," he told himself sternly. "Sylvia will scold me if we are late for the president's reception." As he packed his laptop to go home, a beep on his phone alerted him to an incoming message. After reading it, he sighed. It was from Sylvia. "Meet me at the president's house. The vice-rector needs my help. I'll be back late." Driving home, Shale felt a gloomy mood rise within him. He felt so lucky to have negotiated a position for Sylvia to join the university. Working for her in the provost office would bring in extra money for a few little pleasures that they couldn't afford on his salary alone due to student debt. Moreover, Shale thought that he would not prevent his wife from establishing contacts in the administration. If the president was the university's CEO, then the provost was its chief executive, a powerful figure who directly controlled all academic departments, had institutional responsibility for resource allocation, and chaired the university's budget committee. His influence could be helpful in evaluating Shale for a permanent contract. But things didn't turn out the way Shale expected. Not only was his own workload much heavier than he expected, but after the first year, Sylvia's work began to require more and more of her time. Initially, the vice-rector used her talent as a photographer. He later began to use her organizational skills. As a result, her work schedule became longer and more irregular this year, and she often worked evening and weekend events. Lately, Shale felt like he and Sylvia were communicating more through text messages and email than in person. Not surprisingly, opportunities for sex became rare and fleeting, a loss that Shale felt keenly. But if he was honest with himself, it wasn't just their busy lives that bothered him. It seemed to him that his wife was becoming increasingly colder towards him, especially over the last semester. The easy tenderness that characterized the early years of their marriage had almost disappeared. Shale now sensed Sylvia's growing dissatisfaction with their lifestyle in general and with him in particular. He felt like they were moving away from each other, and lately he had begun to wonder if someone else was causing the changes. Such doubts ate away at his usually cheerful mood. When he returned home, the apartment was empty, but in the bedroom he found a suit, tie, and white shirt prepared for him. "I'm not a child," he muttered to himself. "I know what to wear to an event like this." However, to avoid a quarrel, he put on the clothes chosen by Sylvia and went to the reception. To provide a suitable place to receive important guests and potential donors, the university provided the president with a luxurious mansion in the most prestigious area of the city. When Shale pulled up to the curb in front of the house, the student parking attendant rushed to take the keys and park the car. Shale couldn't help but notice how the young man grimaced at the sight of his old sedan. Shale walked quickly through the mansion, stopping only to grab an appetizer and a glass of white wine from the waiter. He then walked out through the French doors onto a huge terrace decorated with paper lanterns. Making his way through the crowd of teachers and their spouses, he went to look for Sylvia. As the crowd temporarily parted, he spotted her in the distance, deep in conversation with Eric Solveig, the vice-chancellor of the university. Shale felt acid rise in his stomach when he saw Solveig's hand on Sylvia's waist. Sylvia then noticed him and said something to her boss. When the provost turned around and saw Shale approaching, he hurriedly moved away from Sylvia and extended his hand to Shale, who reluctantly shook it. "Very glad you came this evening, Shale," the provost said smoothly. Sylvia told me a lot of good things about you and your research. Shale glanced at Sylvia, but her face remained neutral. He returned to the vice-rector and thanked him for the supposed compliment. With the formalities completed, the vice-chancellor continued calmly. I hope you don't mind if I steal your wife away for a while tonight. She turned out to be so capable that I don't know what I would do without her. With that, the provost turned and led Sylvia away, leaving Sheila standing there, trying to think of an appropriate response. She looked over her shoulder and gave Sheila that mysterious look again before continuing her conversation with Solveig. The brief exchange seemed to crystallize all of Shale's grievances and suspicions. Sylvia didn't say a word to him, barely acknowledged his presence. Instead, Shale thought, she focused all her attention on the man who was her boss, and who knows what else to her. He turned around in anger and almost came face to face with the host and hostess of the evening, Magnus Jefferson, the president of the university, and his wife Margaret. Jefferson had already made academic history by becoming, at 43, one of the youngest people ever to serve as president of a major university. He was tall, with thick dark hair highlighted by gray at the temples, which made him look even more impressive. If a director wanted to cast someone to play a university president in a movie, he would have cast someone like Magnus Jefferson, Shale thought bitterly. The president's wife was what was called attractive. Margaret was also the daughter of one of the university's largest donors. Rumors among the teachers said that their marriage was more like a union of royal houses than a love story between a boy and a girl. For a moment, Shale froze, embarrassed by the near collision and unable to think of anything to say. But Jefferson avoided any awkwardness by smoothly shaking Sheila's hand. Dr. Stevens, the president said warmly, I'm glad you came this evening. The head of the geology department gave me rave reviews about your work. Shale was surprised that the president recognized him and strongly doubted that he had actually received such a review of him. The last time Shale met with the head of his department, he had difficulty remembering his name. However, Shale humbly thanked the president for his words and then politely addressed his wife. You and the president are so kind to invite us all to your place. Today the mansion looks great. The first lady of the university simply nodded gracefully, but Jefferson could not allow silence to prevail. This is the least we can do, the president declared pompously. As I have said many times, our university is strong because of the quality of its teaching staff. Shale remembered the president using the same phrase in another speech when talking about graduates, so his words did not make much of an impression on Shale. But he discarded such heretical thoughts, smiled, and thanked the couple again. Just as the president turned to introduce his wife to another guest, Shale slipped away unnoticed. Quickly moving through the crowd, he walked out the door and asked the valet to return his car. On the way back to his apartment, Shale stopped at a fast food place and bought a sandwich to eat at home. Sitting at the dinner table, he asked himself, how did things get so bad between me and Sylvia? His thoughts went back to the beginning of their relationship. He remembered meeting Sylvia when he was invited to give a lecture to the local chapter of the Geological Society in his hometown. Shale knew he wasn't chosen for his speaking skills. Rather, it was because he had just returned from Iceland, bringing back dozens of breathtaking photographs of that country's many volcanoes. Shale didn't remember much about the lecture itself, but he did remember a photographer from the student newspaper who wanted to interview him after his talk. He still didn't understand why Sylvia was interested in him, but there was no doubt that the slender, dark-haired girl completely captivated him. He later learned that Sylvia was in the process of breaking up after a long relationship, but by then his only goal was to win her over for good. They moved in together while he was completing his doctoral dissertation. If winning Sylvia was Shale's first major success, then submitting her dissertation was the second. Variable rates of diastrophism in the late Archean and Proterozoic eons caused a minor sensation in a narrow circle of geologists. His research into the causes of irregular pulses in the movement of the Earth's tectonic plates was groundbreaking, so much so that his supervisor insisted on being listed as a co-author on publication. Normally, Shale would have been outraged by such undeserved appropriation of merit, but his indignation was forgotten when he received an offer of a permanent position at a prestigious Ivy League university. Such an offer was the academic equivalent of winning the lottery. The same night he received the contract, Shale proposed to Sylvia, and she happily accepted. At first, moving to university seemed like a big gamble, the next step on their path to happiness. But that illusion was quickly shattered by the unexpectedly high cost of living in the new city, Shale's long work hours, and the difficulty of making new friends in the university community. Over time, Sylvia's dissatisfaction began to grow, and Shale could do little to calm her down, especially since he himself was struggling with his own frustration. Despite her complaints about his workload, Sylvia's work also began to take up more and more of her time. By the start of their second year at university, their work schedules had cut into their time together so much that they sometimes seemed more like roommates than husband and wife. Their sex life also began to suffer, and as the second semester began, it went from frequent to rare and almost disappeared. When was the last time? Shale asked himself. In addition to his own sexual frustration, Shale began to wonder if Sylvia was satisfying her needs in some other way. Pulling himself out of his funk, he checked his cell phone. Even though the faculty reception was scheduled until 9 p.m., he saw that it was almost midnight and Sylvia was still not home. Shale remembered the vice principal's hand on Sylvia's waist, and this memory only fueled the fire of his jealousy. At that moment, he heard the key turn in the lock. Since he was sitting in the kitchen, Sylvia didn't notice him when she entered, and he took the opportunity to look her over carefully, looking for any signs that she was doing anything inappropriate. She was certainly dressed attractively, but Shale had to admit that he saw nothing on her that would indicate inappropriate behavior. However, he could not contain his jealousy. The reception ended a few hours ago. "What have you been doing all this time?" he asked, surprising her. She winced, then turned to face him. "I didn't expect to find you awake," she said coldly, crossing her arms as she turned to face him. "Usually you're already asleep by this time. But to answer your question, I worked with Eric. He had a lot to do after the appointment, and he needed my help." "It seems like you always have something for Eric lately," Shale blurted out. "You're never home." "You'd better look at yourself," she replied sharply. "When you're not in the classroom, you're always grading papers or attending committee meetings. You work longer than me. Besides, you were the one who wanted me to take this job from Eric." Shale felt the argument slipping away from him, and his frustration grew. "It's not about me," he answered sharply. "The point is that you disappear at inopportune hours. I never know where you are or when you will return, and when you're at home, you only talk about Eric all the time." Before he could stop himself, he blurted out, "Are you cheating on me with the vice principal?" For a moment, Shale saw an expression on her face that he could not identify, but then she laughed loudly. She then began to pace back and forth before stopping and looking at him. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" she asked unexpectedly. "What?" Shale said confusedly, caught off guard. "It's very simple," she answered mockingly. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Confused, Shale automatically began to think about the question, trying to find an answer. "Well, in 5 years I hope to have a permanent contract, which will give us real stability. I also hope to be promoted to assistant professor, which should bring a nice salary increase. We will earn enough so that you don't have to work if you don't want to. We could even start a family," he added hopefully. But Sylvia only curled her lips contemptuously. "Have you ever thought about working in administration?" she asked. "What? No. Why should I want this? Becoming a professor is what I have strived for all my life. I love geology and I love research. Why would I give that up for a desk job?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "Well, for starters, it would be a lot more prestigious," she replied. "You would be working with real influential people in the world, instead of sitting in your classroom or this dusty laboratory all day." "I don't understand where that came from, Sylvia," Shale said. "Teaching at university is something we've always talked about. This is what we strived for together. I thought this was the life you wanted too. I know the last year or two have been difficult for us, but things will get better, he added, trying to sound optimistic. She looked at him for several moments without saying a word. Then she sighed quietly and said, "It doesn't matter. I'm tired and I need to get up early tomorrow. I am going to sleep." With that, she turned and walked down the hallway towards their bedroom, leaving Sheila standing there, confused. What was it? He asked himself while cleaning the kitchen. When he finished and changed his clothes, Sylvia was already asleep, wrapped in a blanket. Shale lay down next to her and turned off the light. He didn't even try to touch her. It was pretty obvious how she would react. When he woke up the next morning, Sylvia had already left. Since he only had an afternoon class, he managed to have breakfast before heading to the university. While he looked through the documents on his desk, the conversation with Sylvia last night could not leave his mind. What did this all mean about my goals and expectations, he thought. Where did the idea of working in the administration come from? Remembering this conversation, he suddenly realized that Sylvia had not given a direct answer to the question with which the whole conversation began. She never denied cheating on me, he thought suspiciously. At that moment, Mosa looked into his office. "Professor Stevens, may I interrupt you? Anika asked me to bring you the lab report you asked for." Shale raised his head, and the sight of the pretty young woman lifted his spirits for a moment. He motioned for her to come in. "Thank you, Mosa. I really appreciate it." Suddenly, he became concerned. "Is Anika okay? Isn't she sick?" "In love," Mosa replied with a big smile. "When I left, she was on the phone with her mother, discussing the details of her wedding. It's amazing how she manages to do anything else." "Well, let him enjoy it while he can," he replied. "The honeymoon doesn't last forever." Oh, Moses said quickly. "Do I hear a note of displeasure in your comment, Professor Stevens?" Shale mentally chided himself for allowing his personal problems to seep into the conversation. The last thing he wanted was to involve Mosa and Anika in his personal affairs, so he quickly tried to change the subject. No, it's okay. I was just trying to make a joke about how quickly time flies. Anyway, it's very kind of you to do this for her and for me." Mosa did not continue. "Okay, Professor, I won't distract you anymore. Have a nice day." With these words and a smile, she left. He managed to get through his lesson in the afternoon without any problems, but his bad mood returned when he returned to his office. He needed to review the draft report of the Dean's Committee on adjunct status, but he couldn't concentrate. So when Perry Ryan came in and suggested they go for a beer, Shale gladly put the report aside. They found a quiet table at a tavern near campus and ordered a glass. Shale was glad of Perry's company and wanted to know his opinion about his problems. Perry was also an assistant professor in the geology department, but was several years older than Shale. Despite the fact that they could become competitors for a permanent contract in the future, Perry was friendly to his new colleague from day one. In fact, Shale thought Perry was probably his only friend in the department. Both men had young and attractive wives, and they tried several times to establish friendship between the two couples. But for some reason, Sylvia did not get along with Camilla, Perry's wife, and since their wives set the social agenda, the only time Shale and Perry could meet was to have a beer together. Shale wondered if this had something to do with Camilla being an adjunct. He had not previously thought about the position of adjuncts, but after serving on the Dean's Committee, he began to see why it could be a problem. Although the title Associate Professor sounded impressive, and despite the fact that 3/4 of the university's teaching staff were adjuncts, their position was slightly better than that of temporary workers. The university paid them the equivalent of minimum wage for every course they taught, and she was shocked to learn that they received no benefits. They were like highly educated temporary workers with no status and no security. If not enough students enrolled in a course taught by an adjunct, the course could be canceled at the last minute, and the adjunct would suddenly find himself unemployed. Shale had heard of cases where adjuncts at other universities were forced to get food stamps to survive. Given the deplorable situation of adjuncts and the low opinion of them, Shale thought it was not surprising that Camille might feel uncomfortable interacting with other professors and their wives. But today Sheila had other problems. After some chatting, he leaned closer to his friend and said, "Listen, Perry, I have a problem at home and I need some advice." With that, he began to lay out all his frustrations and worries about Sylvia. "I think she may be cheating on me with the vice-rector," he concluded. Perry looked around with concern. "Don't say things that others won't hear," he said in a low voice. "This campus is full of professors and students who love to gossip, and each of them has a camera phone and a Facebook page or Twitter account. Such accusations can spread like a forest fire and cause big trouble." He took a sip of beer. "Besides, I think it's unlikely that Sylvia is cheating on you. It is obvious from your words that you are currently going through a difficult period in your marriage. But every marriage goes through this. In any case, you only have doubts and unconfirmed suspicions. If you accuse Sylvia of cheating, you will only create a gap between you that will be very difficult to mend. But suppose you're right, suppose Sylvia cheats on you. Is it really that important? Isn't it better to turn a blind eye to this than to ruin your marriage? If it comes to divorce, your finances will suffer greatly. Isn't it better to stay calm until she freaks out than to pay alimony for years until she gets married again?" Shale looked at him in amazement. "Are you saying I should just ignore it, pretend nothing happened?" "Exactly," Perry replied calmly. "It's just sex, what's the big deal?" Shale was stunned. "I guess I'm just not wired that way, Perry. Sylvia and I made vows to each other when we got married, and I stand by them, no matter what the odds," he said, thinking about Taylor Poindexter. "I expect Sylvia to abide by them too." The discussion went in circles, and in the end both men went home without changing their opinions. When Shale returned home, he was surprised to find Sylvia already there. Even more surprising was that dinner was in the oven. For the first time in weeks, they spent a pleasant dinner at home together, discussing various events and activities on campus. Just like before, Shale thought. After they cleared away the dishes together, Shale excused himself to do some work to make up for the time he and Perry spent at the tavern. When he finally finished reviewing the report for the dean's committee, the lights in the living room were already turned off. But when he returned to the bedroom, he found Sylvia waiting for him. As soon as he entered, she rose from the bed and walked towards him, and he saw that she was wearing a transparent nightgown that she had bought for their honeymoon. He tried to ask her what was going on, but she pressed her fingers to his lips, saying, "No questions." She then began to undress him and pushed him onto the bed. Oh, that was great sex. When he felt her return, he sat up with difficulty, trying to hug her in order to return her caresses. But she gently pushed him away, reminding him, "Tonight was just for you, remember? I haven't been paying enough attention to you lately, and I wanted to fix that." With that, she lay down under the covers, and by the time he returned to bed, she was already asleep. Lying next to her, Shale felt pleasantly tired. As he drifted off to sleep, he remembered that this was exactly how he felt when they first got married. The next morning, Shale was in a good mood. "I think Perry was right. I was just paranoid about Sylvia," he told himself on the way to work. His good mood continued throughout the exam he was taking for his senior geology course, and even the prospect of grading all the papers couldn't dampen his spirits. He was whistling to himself when Anika entered his office. She looked at him and said with a sly smile, "It looks like someone is very happy today. If I had to guess, I'd say someone got laid last night." Shale was taken aback by her comment and blushed. Anika laughed and said, "Hey, don't be embarrassed, it's good. Mosa told me that you seemed in a bad mood yesterday, but everything seemed to work out last night without any hints." To hide his embarrassment, Shale pretended to be stern. "So, you and Mosa spend all your free time talking about me behind my back." Now it was Anika's turn to be embarrassed. Shale let her suffer for a while before changing the subject. "Did you have something you wanted to show me, Anika?" Grateful for the change of topic, she brought the exam for her lab group to review. They discussed matters for a few minutes before Anika left for her next meeting. As Shale left, he thought again about how lucky he was to have such a smart and capable graduate student. He considered both her and her neighbor his friends, and not just colleagues. In the afternoon, there was a meeting of the committee considering the status of adjuncts at the university. As Shale discovered to his chagrin, his fellow teachers seemed to enjoy endlessly arguing over every proposal. Arguing with colleagues was their favorite pastime. As a result, the meetings were endless, and reaching an agreement was almost impossible. But as he listened to the endless debate, something happened that shook Sheila to the core. One professor suggested a small increase in remuneration for all adjuncts, while another immediately objected. "You're just throwing a bone to a hungry dog to keep him from barking," he said contemptuously. The professor's words seemed to squeeze Shale's stomach with an icy hand. "Is this what Sylvia did last night?" he thought sadly. "Was she just throwing me a bone to distract me from what she's doing behind my back? That's probably why she didn't want me to caress her. It was all for show." As he sat with these thoughts, his smartphone suddenly vibrated. When he took it out, he saw a message from Sylvia. "I work late. Do not wait." Looking at the screen, the message seemed like a mockery. If someone had asked him about the nature of further discussions at the meeting, Shale would not have been able to answer anything. He sat immersed in emotions that replaced each other, from anger to grief, from melancholy to hopelessness and back. When the meeting finally ended, he immediately headed back to his office to try to sort out his thoughts. "I can't believe this is happening to me," he moaned as he sat in the dark room. "If Sylvia is not cheating on me, she certainly acts like she is. But how can I know for sure? She won't admit it, and I have no proof. I don't want to ruin our marriage if I'm wrong. Plus, divorce would be a financial disaster. But if she cheats, I will never be able to turn a blind eye to it, as Perry suggested." He shook his head in exasperation. What should I do? After circling the same circle of thoughts to no avail, the rumbling in his stomach reminded him that he hadn't eaten since lunch. He looked at his watch and was surprised how late it was. Remembering that he had nothing to cook quickly at home, he decided to allow himself the luxury of dining out. "Maybe I'll feel better if I'm around other people instead of being alone all the time," he thought. He drove to a pub popular with students and, as soon as he was seated, ordered a burger and fries. Usually, he tried to eat a healthy diet, but in his current mood, it seemed unimportant. He was halfway through his dinner when his phone suddenly rang, making him jump. He hoped it was Sylvia calling, but the display showed an unknown number. When he answered, at first he did not recognize Mom's voice, and when he realized who it was, she spoke so quickly that he could barely understand her words. Mosa, slow down. I don't understand you what happened." "It's Anika, Shale. She's hysterical. I've never seen her like this. You must come immediately. I do not know what to do." "What happened, Mosa? Why is she hysterical?" he asked insistently, simultaneously taking out his wallet to pay for the food. "This is her fiancé," the young woman said anxiously. "He left her. He called off the wedding. Anika is beside herself. Please come." "Damn," he muttered under his breath. "Listen, Mosa, I'm at a pub near campus, so I can be there in a few minutes. I'm on my way, hold on." Throwing the bill on the table, he rushed out of the pub, ran to his car, and hurried to the graduate student dormitory. When he got off the elevator and knocked on the apartment door, Mosa must have been standing right there because she opened it immediately. Shale was shocked by the sight of Mosa. Her pretty face was distorted with fear, her eyes were red, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. It was obvious that she was deeply shocked, almost in a panic. He grabbed her shoulders to calm her down. "Where is Anika now?" he asked, and she pointed to the closed bedroom door. "She locked herself and won't let me in," Mosa said, choking up. "Okay, before I go there, tell me what happened," Shale said, trying to sound as calm as possible. "It was about half an hour ago," Mosa explained. "He called her. This bastard said that he found another and there will be no wedding. I heard Anika scream and ran there. She was sobbing hysterically. She said that her life was over and that she wanted to die. Okay, let me talk to her and try to calm her down." He let go of Mosa and walked towards the bedroom, but she grabbed his arm. She has a gun, Professor. I think she's going to commit suicide. Where did she get the gun? He asked with horror. She's had it for a long time, Moser replied. Her father gave it to her for protection. Should I call campus security or 911? Shale felt his adrenaline rise sharply, but he tried to remain calm. No, you don't have to do that. Making it official as a suicide attempt could ruin her future, and I don't want that to happen if it can be avoided. You just sit there and keep your phone handy, just in case. Mosa's eyes widened, she nodded and walked away. As Shale approached the bedroom door, he heard Anika crying and sobbing. Just in case, he stood aside and knocked on the door. At first nothing happened, but when he knocked again louder, this time Anika sobbed, "Go away, leave me alone." "Anika, it's me, Professor Stevens. This is Shale, Anika. Please let me in." The sobs turned into sobs, and he heard footsteps approaching the door. The lock clicked, and then the footsteps moved away. Hearing nothing more, Shale carefully turned the door handle and slowly opened it. Anika stood opposite him on the other side of the bed. In her hand was a pistol, which she was waving in his direction. "Who else is there?" she demanded. "There's no one there except me and Mosa, Anika," he said soothingly. "I would like you to put that gun away. You scared poor Mosa half to death." Her tears began to flow again. "No, I won't remove it. My life is over. Everything I lived for was gone. I just want to die," she said, waving the gun. "Listen, Anika, you can't kill yourself. There are too many people who need you and care about you." "Robert doesn't need me," she said, her voice rising in pitch. "He probably cheated on me the whole time I was at university. I feel so stupid." "No," Shale said firmly, "you're just lucky." Her head shot up. "How can you say I'm lucky?" she screamed in anger, and for a moment Shale thought she might shoot. "You're lucky," he continued quickly, "because you found out what he's really like. You were lucky not to marry him and find out the truth later. Trust me, Anika, finding out later is much worse." While he was talking to the upset girl, Shale kept a close eye on the gun in her hand. He noticed that the safety was on, and although she was waving the gun, he thought the safety was on. If so, he hoped she wouldn't realize it and wouldn't be able to switch the safety with her thumb. Anika's tears flowed even more. "My life is ruined. All my dreams have disappeared. I have no reason to live anymore." "No," Shale said angrily. "That's not true, and you know it." The young woman was taken aback by his tone, and Shale continued. "You have people who love you and need you, Anika. You can't just leave them like that. Your family needs you, Mosa needs you, I need you." The upset woman stood looking at him. Shale hoped that his words penetrated her pain and despair and decided to take a chance. "I know you're hurting, Anika, but you don't want to shoot yourself, and I'm sure you don't want to shoot me either. Now give me that gun so we can figure out what to do next." With these words, he carefully walked around the bed, holding out his hand for the pistol. She looked at him uncertainly, and the gun began to shake. Then her hand fell to her side, and she started crying again. Shale quickly took the gun from her naughty fingers. He placed it on the chest of drawers and hugged the girl tightly, who began to sob again. He looked over his shoulder and called out to Mosa, who quickly appeared in the doorway with a scared look on her face. "I think she'll be fine," he reassured her, and the South African girl quickly ran up to them and hugged them too. After a minute, Shale tapped Mosa's hand lightly. "You said you have trouble sleeping?" he asked. When Mosa nodded, he continued, "Do you have any prescription sleeping pills?" "I have Ambien in my medicine cabinet," she said. "Bring me 1 tablet and a glass of water," he ordered. When Mosa returned, he took the tablet and glass and gave them to Anika. She was hesitant at first, but when she insisted, she took the pill. As soon as she did, Shale picked her up and laid her on the bed. "Try to sleep, Anika," he said gently. "Everything will look better in the morning, I promise." He kissed her forehead and covered her with a blanket. Exhausted by hysteria, the girl closed her eyes and fell asleep a few minutes later. Shale led Mosa back to the living room, not forgetting to take the gun. As he left the bedroom, he glanced at the gun. "Damn it," he muttered. The safety was off the whole time. When they returned to the living room, Mosa was still in shock from the incident. "Will she be okay?" she asked anxiously. Her eyes were red and wet. "I think so," Shale said. "Sleep is probably the best thing for her. She's just completely exhausted." Mentally and physically exhausted from the incident, he sat down on the sofa and leaned back. As the adrenaline began to drain from his system, he suddenly felt trembling and lowered his head to rest. A minute later, he felt Mosa climb onto the sofa and lay her head on his chest, like a small child frightened by a nightmare. "I was so scared," she said in a quiet voice, and Shale felt more tears on his shirt. He hugged her to comfort her. "Me too, Mosa," he admitted. Then he closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, the first thing he noticed was the light coming through the window. Surprised, he took out his phone and saw the time. He realized that he had slept all night. He picked Mosa up carefully, trying not to wake her. He then quietly walked into Anika's bedroom. When he opened the door, he saw that she was still fast asleep. Walking back into the living room, he took out his phone again to check his calendar. "Damn," he cursed. "Anika's lab exam is this morning." He walked over to the sofa and gently woke Mosa up. "Mosa," he said quietly, "Anika has a lab exam this morning. She's still sleeping, and I don't want to wake her. I'll go take the exam for her. No one except her students will know she wasn't there, and they won't care." She sat down on the sofa and looked at him carefully. "You know," she said quietly, "you are a pretty amazing person. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come last night. Anika is really happy to have a friend like you. In fact, I think we're both happy." Shale was confused. "Anyone else would have done the same," he said hesitantly. Then, seeing that Mosa was about to object, he quickly added, "Listen, I better go. If I hurry, I can get home and take a quick shower before heading to the lab. When Anika wakes up, try to feed her. Then send me a message and tell me how she is." As he turned to leave, he remembered Anika's pistol. "I'll just take this with me for safety," he said with a smile. Mosa walked him to the door and hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Shale. Thank you for being our hero." Driving home, Shale felt good about what he had done. But remembering everything that happened, he shook his head in amazement. "What was I thinking, trying to take a loaded gun from the hands of a hysterical woman?" he asked himself. "Sylvia won't believe what happened." As soon as he thought about Sylvia, all his family problems came flooding back to him. Then a thought came to him, and when he stopped at a traffic light, he took out his phone and checked it. After not finding any calls from Sylvia last night, his mood became even darker. "What the hell? I was out all night, and she didn't even call to find out where I was. Didn't she know I wasn't there, or did she just not care?" When he got home, he quickly showered and changed clothes. Before leaving for university, he quickly looked around their apartment. The bed had not been dismantled, and the kitchen remained untouched. As far as he could tell, Sylvia wasn't home either. Where was she last night, he asked himself, and what did she do? As he watched the students take the lab exam, the same questions kept repeating in his head, and his resentment grew. There might have been an innocent explanation for his wife's absence, but he couldn't think of one. When the exam was over and he collected all the papers, he returned to his office and decided to start checking right away. Luckily, most of the questions were multiple choice or fill in the blank, so he didn't think it would take much time. He was halfway through his exam papers when he heard a soft knock on the door. Raising his head, he saw Mosa's face peering behind the door frame. He quickly invited her in. "Something happened?" he asked anxiously. "No, Anika seems okay," she said. "I just wanted to bring you a little gift to say thank you." Shale began to protest, but Mosa pulled out a bag of food from behind her back. She laughed. "I thought you probably didn't have breakfast, and you probably didn't have lunch either. I couldn't let you starve to death, could I? Shale thanked her for her concern and greedily began to eat the sandwich she brought. While they were eating, Moza told him about Anika's condition when she woke up. It will take time for her, she concluded, but I think she will get better. But do you know what her biggest problem is now? When Shale looked at her with concern, Moza smiled widely. Her biggest problem is that she is ashamed to meet you. She is terribly embarrassed for her behavior and for the fact that you saw her in such a state. She really thinks highly of you, and it kills her that you saw her like that. Shale was glad that Anika was okay, but was upset by her reaction. This is stupid, Mosa. Everyone sometimes needs help from friends. I'm just glad you and I were there to help Anika when she needed it. Tell her she has nothing to be ashamed of. Mosa stood up to go back to the dorm and check on her friend, but before leaving, she stopped at the door. Be that as it may, you are truly a hero in my eyes. I thought you were incredibly brave when you walked in and took the gun from Anika in her condition. And despite what you said, I don't think many people have a friend like you. You are truly a special person. Before Shale could say anything, she smiled widely and hurried out of his office. Shale shook his head. He didn't feel like a hero, but Moses' words still gave him a warm feeling. When he returned to his desk, his good mood quickly evaporated. He could have finished checking the exams from Anika's course, but now he had to check all the exams from his own courses. Unlike the lab exam, many of the questions on his tests required essay answers, which took much longer. He sighed and took the top blue book from the stack. By the time he finished grading the exams from his first year, the light through his office window was beginning to fade and his stomach was growling again. Maybe I should continue working at home. Surely I'll find something to eat there, he said to himself. And to be honest, he also wanted to check if Sylvia was back. When he returned to their apartment, Sylvia was not home, although Shale noticed signs that she had been there before. Her closet door had been left open, a towel thrown on the floor indicated she had taken a shower, and he found a load of laundry running in the washing machine. All these things seemed suspicious to him, but none of them was definitive proof of treason. He sighed in disappointment and went to make himself a sandwich. Then he sat down to check the exams. A few hours later, Shale was startled by the sound of a key in the lock of their front door and looked up just in time to see Sylvia walking past the kitchen door towards the bedroom. When he followed her, he found that the bathroom door was closed and the sound of the shower could be heard. Another shower, he asked himself. This raised his blood pressure several notches, and he stood there, looking at the closed bathroom door in frustration. After waiting a few minutes, he gave up and went back to grading his exams. After a while, he looked up and saw Sylvia, dressed in a robe and pajamas, standing in the doorway. Well, well, she said sarcastically, I was beginning to doubt that you'd ever come home. Who did you spend last night with? Taken by surprise, Shale began to mutter, It wasn't like that. One of my students was having a crisis, and I had to help her. What did you do? Rob her at gunpoint? Sylvia asked, holding Anika's gun. No, of course not, answered Shale. Her fiancé left her. She was going to kill herself, and... He trailed off, saying, It's a long story. Of course, Shale, I believe you, she said in a mocking tone, carefully placing the gun on the countertop. Her tone brought out all the anger and resentment that had been building up in Sheila, and he abruptly stood up and pointed a finger at her. Never mind me, where have you been all night? Oh, she said casually, I worked late and fell asleep at my desk. He looked at her in disbelief. Do you really think I'll believe this? Whether you believe it or not, it happened like that, she said indifferently. I think you spent the night with Eric Solveig, Shale said hotly. That's what I think. She shook her head and sighed theatrically. We've been over this before, Shale, and it's starting to get boring. What makes you think that? Listen, Sylvia, you have to admit that things have gotten tense between us. We barely see each other. You sleep out of the house and don't even call to let us know where you are. We haven't made love in ages. Wait a minute, mister. We made love just a few days ago, or don't you remember? Well, okay, maybe, but it seemed less like love and more like a handout to keep me quiet, Shale said hotly. Sylvia folded her arms and frowned at her husband. Just listen to yourself, Shale. You say we never see each other, but you're always busy with university things. You blame me for not keeping in touch, but you could have called me last night and told me where you were. From my point of view, the problem is you, not me. You're having fun going about your little job as an assistant professor, and you really don't give a damn about what I want or need. I think you have the nerve to make wild accusations without having any basis for them. No evidence. She shook her head and sighed again. Now I'm tired and going to bed. With these words, she turned on her heel and walked into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. When he heard the click of the lock, Shale wanted to follow her, intending to knock down the door. But he stopped himself and stood there in the corridor in helpless anger. If Sylvia calls the police and accuses him of domestic violence, his career will be over. However, he knew that he had not imagined any change in Sylvia's behavior, and that anyone would agree that her behavior was extremely suspicious. But he also knew she was right. He had no proof. What's worse, he thought, was that she was almost provoking him to do something. But what could he do? He didn't have time to follow her and couldn't afford to hire a private detective. What if he hires and finds nothing? Will this be proof of her innocence? He didn't believe it, but logic told him that he should at least consider the possibility. He turned and walked back towards the kitchen. Seeing the stack of exams left to be checked, he sighed heavily. Not tonight, he thought. I just can't do this right now. Frustrated and tired, he turned off the light and went into the living room to sleep on the sofa. When he woke up the next morning, his body was stiff and aching. I have to stop sleeping on sofas, he told himself regretfully as he tried to stretch his muscles. When he returned to the bedroom, he found the door open and Sylvia had left. He shook his head. Again, he had no idea what she was doing, where she was going, or when she would return, if at all. I just can't live like this anymore, he told himself. He quickly showered, got dressed, and collected all the exams, intending to continue reviewing them in his office. He knew he had no choice but to finish them all today, no matter how long it took. The university has made it clear to teachers that submitting all grades on time is mandatory. Failure to comply with this requirement was a serious offense that will be taken into account when making decisions on awarding an academic title. When he arrived at his office, he closed the door and got to work. He had been poring over the blue book for several hours when he heard a timid knock on the door. He sighed and said, "Come in." The door opened, and the slender figure of Mosa appeared from behind the door frame. I know you're on deadline, Shale, so I won't keep you long. I just wanted to bring you some reinforcements. I thought you might need it. With that, she pulled out a cup of coffee and a pastry from Starbucks. Shale couldn't help but laugh appreciatively. Thank you, Mosa. That's really very kind of you. I didn't have breakfast, so you may have saved my life. She smiled back and added, I also brought something else for you. When he looked at her questioningly, she stepped back into the hallway and briefly whispered to someone. Finally, she grabbed the hand and pulled in Anne, who had reluctantly entered to a small office. Shale hurriedly left his desk and took Anika's hands. I'm so glad to see you, he said. How do you feel? The blonde graduate student could barely look Sheila in the eyes, so Mosa spoke up. I kind of forced her to come to you. She kept saying she was too embarrassed. Shale understood everything immediately. He lifted Anika's chin so he could see her face. Her eyes were still red, but they no longer had that wildness of despair and grief that he had seen in her apartment. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Anika. You went through a terrible ordeal. Anyone could have broken down. She looked at him, her lips trembling. In a whisper, she said, I'm so ashamed, Dr. Stevens. I can't believe I threatened you, especially when you were trying to help me. I just felt so lost, so hopeless when Robert. He thought again that she was about to cry, so he hugged her. Everything will be fine, Anika. Robert is a fool for letting you go. One day he will understand this, and it will be too late, because you will find someone better who will be worthy of your love. He grabbed her shoulders and held her at arm's length so he could see her face again. Don't feel bad about the pain. How could you not feel it? Trust me, I know what it's like to find out that someone you love stops caring about you. Anika glanced quickly at Mosa, who raised her eyebrows and nodded in understanding. I told you something was going on, the dark-haired roommate said. Then she turned to Shale. Okay, Dr. Stevens, what's going on between you and your wife? You haven't been yourself the last few weeks, and you've hinted at it a few times already. What's going on, and how can we help? Shale let Anika go and began to deny everything, but his frustration and fatigue exhausted his strength, and he suddenly told the whole story to the two women. As all his suspicions and anguish poured out, they exchanged glances of concern. When he finally stopped, Anika took a moment to ask, "What was it that morning when you came into the office so happy? I thought things were getting better for you." Her question confused him, but Shale had gone so far that he now felt that he could not hide anything. I think that morning I really thought things were going well for us. The night before we had made love for the first time in a long time, well, more accurately, she had made love to me, but wouldn't let me do anything for her. It seemed strange to me, but... At this point, Mosa snorted. She was just pleasuring. Anika laughed out loud. Classic, she said. What are you talking about? Shale asked in confusion. The two women looked at each other, and Mosa spoke first. This is something us girls discuss in the dorm. It's a way to deal with a guy you don't like or who gets too aggressive. Of course, Anika said. The girl is just giving the guy quick pleasure. Mosa looked at Sheila sadly. I'm afraid your wife gave you pleasure and immediately kicked you off. Shale's anger returned in full, not only at his wife, but also at himself for allowing himself to be deceived so easily. He looked at the two young women with irritation. What really kills me is that I can't figure out what she's doing. Her behavior makes me think she's having an affair with her boss, but she denies it, and I can't prove it. And so far I haven't been able to. There is always an element of doubt. It drives me crazy. Could you hire a private investigator to follow her and get photographs? Mosa asked. These guys cost a fortune, Shale said irritably. Besides, if she's doing something on campus, a stranger probably won't be able to find her. I'd rather keep an eye on her myself, but I have so much work to do that I can't find the time. Anika and Mosa exchanged glances. Then Anika said excitedly, Let us do this. Mosa and I know what Salvia looks like, and we know this campus like the back of our hands. Next time you think something is going on, we'll be your detectives. No way, Shale said decisively. I don't want to get you too involved in my problems. Besides, if the wrong people see you and start asking questions, it could cause problems for both of you. Okay, then how about this? Mosa suggested. We won't be breaking into buildings or listening at doors. We'll just be keeping an eye on her, seeing where she goes and letting you know. At least that way you'll know where to look if you want to check out what she's up to. Please, Anika begged. You've done so much for me. Let Mosa and I do something for you. I don't know, Shale said. I'm still thinking. At that moment, his phone beeped with an incoming message. When he read it, his face darkened. He showed it to the two women so they could see the text from Sylvia. Don't expect me tonight. She's doing it again, he said angrily. There are only 3 days left before the end of the school year. What could she have that is so important that she needs to work late? He stared at Mosa and Anika, clutching his face in disappointment. Okay, if you really want to play detective, keep an eye on her while I finish grading these exams. When I'm done, I'll call you and take over. I have to get to the truth, but I'll take all the risks, and not for you too. Agreed, Mosa said, and to Sheila's surprise, they both leaned over and kissed his cheeks. Now, go back to checking, Professor, Anika instructed him, and leave the detective work in our capable hands. The two women walked away, animatedly discussing what they needed to do to find and track Sylvia. Returning to his stack of exams, Shale wondered if he was making a mistake by involving two women in his problems. At least it takes Anika's mind off her own troubles, he reasoned. It was already dark when Shale finished all the exams and entered the grades into the university system. When he was sure he had done everything necessary, he picked up his phone and sent Anika a message. "How are you? Where are you?" A moment later, his phone rang. It was Mosa. "We're outside Elliot's hall. She just came inside." "I'm done here. I'll be right there," he told her. Elliott Hall was the university's administrative building. The gray building, made in the classical Roman style, was 3 stories high. Shale found Anika and Mosa waiting under a huge maple tree on the front lawn. We had been following her all day, and everything she did seemed quite innocent. Then, just recently, she went outside to make a call on her mobile phone. I couldn't get close enough to listen, but after the call, she looked worried. She headed straight to Elliot's hall, and at that moment you called. We didn't follow her inside because we decided that a couple of students, be born in the lobby, would look too suspicious, Mosa explained apologetically. "Look, you did great," Shale assured her. "You two go home. I'll handle the rest." Anika nodded, but Mosa grabbed Sheila's hand. "You're not going to do anything crazy, are you?" He smiled darkly. "I'm not here for revenge, just to find out the truth." Seeing that she didn't calm down, he added, "I'll call you later and let you know what I found." Reluctantly, she released him, and the 2 young women walked across campus toward the graduate student dorm, looking back at him with concern. Shale boldly walked up the marble steps to the main entrance. Once in the lobby, he looked around and, seeing no one, headed for the stairs instead of the elevator. He knew the layout of the building well enough to know that the vice-chancellor's office was in one wing of the top floor, and the president's office was in the other. If Sylvia was there with the provost, he didn't want the sound of the elevator to alert them. When he reached the 3rd floor, he cautiously peered down the flight of stairs to make sure no one was there. The corridor seemed empty, so he tiptoed to the door of the vice-rector's reception room, trying not to make any sounds on the marble floor. Leaning against the reception door, he was surprised to find that it opened easily. Looking inside, he saw that there was no one at the reception table. He hesitated, not knowing what to do next, when he heard a woman's moans coming from behind the door with the brass sign, Provost's Office. It was easy to walk silently across the carpeted floor and listen at the door, trying to understand what exactly was going on inside. Again he heard the woman moan, and then the sound of heavy breathing. Shale's anger flared, and he prepared to burst through the door, intending to catch his wife and her boss in the act. But he remembered his promise to Mose, so instead he carefully opened the door just enough to peek inside. As he expected, he saw the vice principal vigorously having sex with Sylvia. Taking a risk, Shale took out his smartphone and turned on the video recording. "Now I have proof," he thought bitterly, opening the door a little wider and starting to record. As he watched, the provost grabbed Sylvia by the hair, pulling her head back. But something was very wrong, because Shale suddenly realized that the vice-rector's mistress was not Sylvia at all. He stared at them in amazement for a moment, then pulled back sharply, suppressing a cry. Now he knew who this woman was. It was Perry's wife, Camilla. He closed the door carefully so as not to make a sound and stepped back. What he saw not only surprised him, but also greatly confused him. If Solveig is cheating with Camilla, then maybe Sylvia was telling the truth all along. But even as he felt a pang of doubt, he remembered his wife's disdainful attitude and her inexplicable absences. "I didn't imagine this. What the hell is going on here?" he thought as he slipped out of the vice-rector's office and back into the corridor. He stood there, trying to decide what to do next, when he heard the sound of the elevator going up. Panicked, he knew he had to move if he didn't want to get caught. Quickly, Shale ran down the hallway in the other direction, not wanting Solveig and Camilla to find him if they came out. Then he heard footsteps heading his way, and when he heard Sylvia's signature laugh, he knew he needed to hide. In desperation, he began to try different doors, looking for an unlocked one. When he came to an unmarked door without a handle at the end of the corridor, He pushed it in desperation and was relieved to find that it opened. Slipping inside the dark room, he let the door close and began to listen carefully, trying to understand where Sylvia and her companion were going. As he waited, his eyes began to adjust to the dimness, and he realized that he was in a luxuriously furnished bathroom. This must be the president's private toilet, he thought with amusement. At that moment, he heard Sylvia's voice again, this time accompanied by the characteristic tone of Magnus Jefferson. The sound came from the office outside his hiding place. Shale tiptoed to the door and knelt down to peer through the vents. He almost gasped when he saw Sylvia sitting on Jefferson's lap with her arms around his neck. "I'm so disappointed," she said. "I thought we were going to have the whole evening together." "God knows I wish I could, but I have a meeting I have to go to," he said in his deep voice. "At least let me please you quickly," Shale heard her ask. "I love pleasing you so much. Please, Magnus." "Very well," he said, "but you must leave in 10 minutes so I can get ready." "10 minutes will be enough for me," she said hoarsely. With these words, she began to satisfy him. Shale's moment of hope for Sylvia's loyalty had long passed, but after learning the truth, he still felt angry. So that's how things are, he thought bitterly. He took out his phone again and started recording through the vents, knowing that this time Sylvia would not be able to brush off the truth. Looking around, Shale noticed that the mirror hanging on the wall of the office gave him a better view of what was happening at Jefferson's desk. He focused the camera on this, all the while seething with anger as he watched his wife pleasure the university president. Then she stood up and kissed her lover passionately. "That was wonderful, honey, but now I really need to get ready for the meeting," he said. "I understand, Magnus. I will leave. But it's so hard for me to be content with just short moments with you," she said passionately. I know," he said, leading her to the door. "I feel the same way." Now that Sylvia was gone, Shale wanted to leave, but decided it would be prudent to wait until Jefferson left for his meeting. If only he didn't have to use the toilet, he thought pleadingly. But before he could stand up and relieve the pain in his knees, he heard a woman's voice. "So, Magnus, did you like it?" Shocked, Shale looked through the vents again and saw Margaret Jefferson enter the office. He was even more stunned to hear Jefferson's answer. "I definitely liked it, honey. She's a very passionate young woman." Mrs. Jefferson sat down in a chair near her husband's desk. "I have to admit, she's really cute." She looked at her husband carefully. "You know she's in love with you, right?" "Of course," he replied with a smile. "That's part of what makes her so passionate." Margaret looked at him sharply. "Just be careful not to fall in love with her." Magnus laughed again. Now, darling, you know that's not true. Besides, I will never leave you." His wife did not calm down. "You better not leave me if you want to keep my father's support and his donations." "Don't be boring, Margaret. I know what I'm doing. FYI, I'm almost done with the lovely Sylvia. I plan to break up with her right after graduation." His wife relaxed and looked at him carefully. "I wonder if I can get her to give me some of that same attention after you break up with her. She's such a sweetheart, and I'd love to see what she's capable of." "I'm afraid you'll have to look elsewhere, dear. I can assure you that this sly little bastard is completely heterosexual." "It's a shame," said Margaret, "but I suppose I can find other options." Jefferson glanced at the luxurious clock on his desk and stood up abruptly. "We're late, honey." When she assured him that he was in the clear, they both quickly left the office, allowing Shale to rise to his feet with a loud groan. But the pain in his knees was nothing compared to the pain he felt due to the bitter turn his life had taken. When he was safely out of the building, he picked up the phone again and called Anika. "What happened, Shale? What did you find out?" she asked anxiously. "Can I sleep over at your place tonight?" he answered in a quiet voice. "I'd hate to go home." "Oh, Shale, I'm so sorry," she said. After another night on the couch, Shale went to his office and found the contact information for a local divorce lawyer. Now that he knew the truth about Sylvia, he couldn't stay with her. He was lucky to get the appointment quickly. After listening to the situation and considering various aspects, the lawyer promised to submit the necessary documents next week. She also gave Shale some advice on what to do to protect his finances, and Shale spent the next few hours opening a new bank account, transferring funds from their joint account, canceling joint credit cards, and making necessary insurance changes. He was pleased to take action, but the shadow of failure hung over everything. His marriage was over, and his life as he imagined it was coming to an end. When he had completed all the possible steps to break up for the day, he returned to his office because he had one more task to complete before going to Sylvia's house. Having finished, he was about to leave, but Perry Ryan suddenly came out of his office and called out to him. "Hey, Shale, did you get all your grades in on time?" Shale sighed heavily. He hoped to avoid dating Perry so as not to involve him in his problems. But now that they were face to face, Shale decided he had no choice. If I'm really his friend, then it's my responsibility to tell him, he thought as he walked into Perry's office and closed the door behind him. "What's happened?" asked Perry, surprised by Sheila's serious appearance. "Perry, I was in Eric Solveig's office last night," Shale began. "And how is the vice-rector doing?" Perry asked casually, but she noticed something strange in his eyes. "Perry, I don't know how to put it mildly, so I'll say it straight. Solveig and Camilla are cheating." His colleague simply stared at him, and Shale was surprised by his lack of reaction. "Perry, I know it's a shock. Maybe you don't even believe me. But they didn't know I was there, and I was able to get them on video. I can show you if you want." Perry began to rub his mouth, staring at Sheila. After a long moment, he said quietly, "No, I don't want to see the video, Shale. I know about their affair. I've known about it from the very beginning." Now Shale was in shock. "You knew about this and did nothing? What kind of husband are you?" There was a fire in Perry's eyes, and for a moment Shale thought he was about to leave the table. Then the fire died down, and he fell into his chair. "Shale, Camille and I have $723 in our bank account. We owe almost $150,000 in student loans. When I make my monthly loan payment, pay my rent, and send in my car payment, there is almost nothing left from my paycheck. Camille has a PhD, so you'd think she'd be able to earn enough to help us make ends meet. But as an adjunct professor, she only makes a few $1,000s for each course she teaches. And this semester the university only gave her one course. So when Eric Solveig came to Camilla and offered her a full-time position next year in exchange for her personal services, what do you think we did? I hated it, but I went for it because we had no other choice." Did not have. He stared at his desk, ashamed to look Sheila in the eyes. "Camilla hates it too. She says Solveig is a bad lover, but she does it for us." Shale remembered the scene he saw through the door of the vice-chancellor's office. Judging by the moans of delight he heard and the way she responded, he didn't think Camilla was faking it, but decided to keep his opinion to himself. "I can only imagine what you think of me and Camilla for that matter," Perry continued. "I understand how life can take people to places where there are no good options," Shale told him. "All I can do is hope for the best for both of you." He was about to leave, but then turned around. "And don't worry, I won't tell anyone what you told me." As Shale crossed campus to his parking lot, he felt slightly nauseous. "There are no good options in my life either," he thought, "but I would never sell my wife, no matter how difficult the situation is. Of course, I won't have a wife soon, so this is a problem that I won't have to solve," he thought bitterly. It was already late in the afternoon when he reached their apartment. As he approached the door, he realized that he would have to move. This place is too big and expensive for him to live here alone. Unsurprisingly, Sylvia wasn't home, so Shale went to rummage through the refrigerator for something to eat. There was almost nothing inside. Finally, he contented himself with cooking the last 2 remaining eggs. After a modest meal of scrambled eggs and toast, washed down with the remains of an old bottle of wine, he sat down on the sofa and prepared to wait. It seemed likely to him that she would return, since the university calendar indicated that President Jefferson would be speaking at a charity event, and Shale was almost certain that Magnus would take his wife with him, not Sylvia. However, he was surprised when the key turned in the lock and Sylvia walked inside. She, in turn, seemed equally surprised to see Shale sitting there, but quickly pulled herself together. "I see the prodigal son has returned home," she said sarcastically. "I don't want to argue with you, Sylvia, not right now. I'm here to tell you personally that I'm filing for divorce. You'll likely be served with the papers early next week." She walked to a chair on the other side of the room and sat down. Even with everything that had happened, Shale couldn't help but notice how good her legs looked in the pencil skirt. "And what prompted you to take such a radical step?" she asked calmly, settling down. Shale looked at her with an even expression on his face. "No more games, Sylvia. I'm filing for divorce because you cheated on me with Magnus Jefferson." To his surprise, she laughed contemptuously. "Do you really know something? First I'm cheating on you with the vice chancellor, now you think I'm cheating on you with the president. Do you understand how crazy that sounds, Shale? I was in President Jefferson's office last night. I saw you two together." "That's impossible," she answered sharply. "You're making this all up." Instead of answering, he went to the TV and turned it on along with the DVD player. Then he pressed the remote control, and suddenly a video appeared on the screen in which she was very good at pleasing the president. At first, Sylvia simply stared at the screen in surprise. As she realized what she was seeing, her face turned pale. But when Shale stopped the video, she became defiant. "Aren't you great, detective?" she grinned. "Are you proud of yourself? Trespassing, making dirty videos, voyeurism." "No," he said. "I'm just curious now. What happened, Sylvia? I thought we had a good marriage. I thought we had the same goals and dreams. How did we get here?" he asked. "Do you really want to know?" she asked, her face contorted with anger. "Everything changed when I started working for Eric. It didn't take long before I learned how people in the administration viewed teachers. He joked about their quirks, petty rivalries, and obsessions with things that didn't matter in the real world. For the people in the administration, the teachers were just spoiled, overeducated children. Then, when I started working for Magnus, I started meeting real powerful people, billionaire donors, captains of industry offering research grants, government officials in need of advice. These people are who Magnus communicates with every day, while you're stuck in a dusty lab teaching bored students the difference between sedimentary and igneous rocks. What's worse, I realized that you loved it all, that you would be happy to immerse yourself in this for the rest of your life. The closer I worked with Magnus, the more I admired his drive, ambition, and influence. When we became lovers, I saw a way to get out of your pathetic little world and into something much bigger and better." Shale looked at her as if she were an unknown specimen under a microscope. Was this the woman he married? Had she always had this envy and insecurity that he saw now, or had it only manifested itself since they arrived at the university? "I guess it doesn't matter anyway," he thought sadly. She shrugged her shoulders with disdain. "If you want to file for divorce, go ahead. You're just saving me the trouble of having to do it myself. All this means is that Magnus and I can be together even sooner. He plans to leave his wife right after graduation, and once the divorce is finalized, I will become Mrs. Magnus Jefferson." He looked at her for a moment. Then, in a calm voice, he said, "You need to see something else." With these words, he pressed the play button again, and now the voice of Margaret Jefferson sounded from the speakers. Shale didn't even look at the screen. Instead, he watched Sylvia's face intently. At first, there was disbelief in her eyes when she saw and heard the conversation that took place after she left the president's office. When she heard Jefferson's words, Shale saw her confidence crumble and shock fill her eyes. When the video suddenly stopped, what remained of her composure fell apart and she began to sob. Shale stood up, ignoring her tears. "I'm leaving. You can stay here for the night, but by the end of graduation you have to leave. I don't know where you'll go, that's not my problem." He picked up his packed luggage and headed towards the door, but then stopped. "However, I don't recommend trying to get into the president's mansion, he added bitterly. As he walked out the door, Sylvia screamed. Shale drove back to the graduate student dorm. When he knocked on the door, Mosa quickly opened it and hugged him as he entered. How did everything go? She asked sympathetically. As bad as could be expected, he replied. Saturday morning was graduation day. There was a joke among teachers that the only good reason to miss graduation was to call and say that you had died. Shale didn't want to break the rules in his hopes of earning an academic title, so he reluctantly donned the required academic uniform. The golden yellow robe of science over his black robe made him look like some kind of ridiculous bumblebee, but tradition outweighed taste in such matters. When he arrived at the university, the large quadrant was filled with row after row of folding chairs positioned in front of a large platform erected for teachers and speakers. As Shale looked up at the steep steps leading up to the stage, he only hoped that none of the graduates would fall as they attempted to overcome this final hurdle on the way to their diploma. The weather was perfect, and the quadrant quickly filled with friends and families. There was a small platform set up in the center of the crowd with a videographer on top who was continuously recording the entire ceremony. The photographer wandered around, taking pictures and footage for the university website. Even in its dark mood, Sheila was impressed by the performance. When pomp and circumstance finally began, the teachers marched, walked up to the stage, and sat down. Shale noticed Perry sitting a few seats down, but he stubbornly refused to look in his direction. The graduating classes followed, filling their designated rows in front of the stage. When everyone was finally seated, President Jefferson rose to begin the ceremony. Despite his contempt for the man, Shale couldn't help but admire the way the president skillfully intertwined tradition and formality with a touch of humor. That bastard would make a good political candidate, he admitted. Damn, this is probably already part of his master plan, he thought. The president then launched into an extended metaphor about the contract between the student and the university. Today, students fulfilled their commitment to us by completing the requirements to receive their degrees, and we, the faculty and administration, fulfilled our promise to provide them with a world-class education, he emphasized, pausing for emphasis. At that moment, a sharp voice came from the crowd, which the microphone transmitted to everyone present. You are lying. Some in the crowd chuckled, and Jefferson looked around in amazement, unable to believe that anyone had dared to interrupt him. His quick glance did not find the source, so he tried to continue. As I said, you are lying, the scream sounded again. You didn't keep your promise to me. People on stage and in the audience began to stand up and turn their heads, trying to see what was happening. Jefferson's head whipped around again, and this time he focused on the photographer who was standing on stage taking pictures. Shale peered between two fellow teachers to get a better look and gasped. It's Sylvia, he realized in amazement. She was wearing jeans and a hoodie, her hair hidden under the hood, and with the camera in front of her face, neither Magnus nor Shale recognized her. As the president stared at her, dumbfounded, she stood up and walked towards him. When she removed her hood, he gasped as he recognized her. Sylvia, what are you doing? This is not the time or place. He began in a quiet voice, but the microphone caught every word. With a loud cry of rage, Sylvia lifted the camera above her head and smashed it on the stage floor. The lens broke into pieces and rolled across the stage, and the noise echoed through the speakers. The audience gasped. I will not be thrown away like a useless toy, Sylvia cried. Campus police stood at the perimeter of the crowd from the beginning of the ceremony. Now Shale noticed several of them trying to make their way to the stage, but the aisles crowded with spectators were preventing them. One of the officers was able to approach the stage, but Sylvia noticed him. Quickly, she pulled the gun from her camera bag over her shoulder. It's Anika's gun, Shale realized with alarm. He completely forgot about him. Back, Sylvia shouted to the campus police officer. Don't try to stop me. I'll have my say. The spectators in the back rows of the quadrant could not see what was happening, but those closer to the stage noticed, and shouts began. She has a gun. Like a wave receding from the shore, The crowd began to retreat from the stage. Sylvia waved the gun at Jefferson as she turned to the audience. He lied to me. He promised that he would leave his wife. He said that he would marry me, she screamed in a wild voice. Jefferson stood paralyzed, holding on to the podium for support. The crowd had calmed down a bit now, trying to hear what was going on. Hundreds of mobile phones were held aloft to capture the scene before their eyes. Suddenly, to everyone's surprise, one of the teachers stood up, crying into her eyes. He promised to marry me too. Then the other teacher jumped to her feet. He promised me a title if I slept with him, she screamed, pointing an accusing finger at Jefferson. Then a young woman among the graduates stood on a chair. He promised to write off my student debts, she screamed. The crowd gasped at each new accusation, mesmerized by the drama unfolding before them, wondering what would happen next. As each new voice joined the other accusers, Sylvia's head swiveled back and forth, as if she were watching some strange tennis match. Now she turned back to Jefferson. "You bastard," she screamed. "You lied to us all." Jefferson extended his arms towards her and took a step towards her. "You have to let me explain myself, Sylvia. Nothing is as it seems." "Back," she screamed, gesturing with her pistol. The gun fired with a deafening boom that echoed across the quadrant, amplified by the loudspeakers. Screams were instantly heard and people ran for cover. Jefferson stood there for a moment with a look of shock on his face. He then reached to the chest of his academic robe. As his fingers returned red, his face took on an expression of confusion, and he slowly collapsed onto the stage. From his place at the back of the stage, Shale saw the entire quadrant seem to be in motion as people tried desperately to escape the shooter. Panicked people fell over chairs and tripped over each other in their quest for distance and safety. On stage, faculty members pushed each other as they tried to escape down the back steps of the platform. Several of them were thrown aside and fell heavily to the ground. In the midst of all the chaos, Shale found himself trying to reach the podium. The voice inside him kept telling him to run like everyone else, but his sense of responsibility kept him moving forward. "I have to try to stop this," he thought as he walked towards Sylvia. She was squatting over Jefferson's body. "What have I done?" she continued to repeat. "Sylvia," Shale shouted over the noise, and the worried woman looked over her shoulder at him. She then saw a guard climbing the steps on the other side of the platform. She looked back at Sheila with a resigned expression, then turned to Jefferson. When Shale tried to grab her, she pointed the barrel of Anika's gun at herself and pulled the trigger. The story captured media attention for several weeks. The initial shooting and the panic it caused were quite sensational, but the investigations only made the situation worse. It was discovered that Magnus Jefferson had been having illicit and inappropriate relationships with university staff and students, and it soon became known that his wife was doing the same. Worse, many of these relationships were motivated by offers of money or benefits. Some were coerced by threats of reprisals. It was then revealed that Eric Solveig, the provost, was acting as a sort of sexual purveyor on campus, identifying potential victims and directing them to Jefferson or exploiting them himself. These predatory practices continued for a number of years. Even more damning was the revelation that others in the administration knew what was going on and did nothing. In a desperate attempt to save its reputation, the university demanded the resignation of almost everyone at the highest level of the administration. The Board of Trustees met and later issued an apology on behalf of the institute. They also decided that Elliott's Hall, SC such vicious actions should be demolished, and another building should be designated as an administrative building. Of course, none of these measures helped limit the scandal. A photo of a student standing on a chair has become a meme about sexual harassment. The headlines endlessly alliterated the words president, provost, predator, and pervert. Ultimately, the university was forced to abandon these titles and replace them with chancellor and vice-chancellor for operations. Realizing that a lengthy trial could keep the disaster in the public eye for years, the university quickly created a special fund to settle victims' claims. The funding of this fund was a significant blow to the university's multi-billion-dollar endowment. Attorney Sheila was able to negotiate a special settlement with his employer. In exchange for a seven-figure payout, the university bought out Shale's contract, and he agreed to leave the school. Shale couldn't blame them for not wanting him around. He would have been a constant reminder of this whole terrible saga. In fact, he himself did not want to be a constant source of whispers and jokes on campus. Shale also filed a lawsuit against Eric Solveig, but his lawyer advised him not to proceed. "It's not worth it," she told him. "Solveig is facing a number of lawsuits, and he has vowed to fight each one to the end. A lengthy trial will be very expensive for you, and when it's over, you will get nothing, because Solveig's legal expenses will leave him destitute." "I hear what you're saying," Shale replied angrily, "but it's driving me crazy. Besides, I wanted to get him on the witness stand and find out what really happened between him and Sylvia, to find out how all this nonsense has begun." The lawyer looked at him shrewdly. "If you want the truth, I think I know how you can get it." A few weeks later, Shale sat in the conference room of the law firm representing Eric Solveig. In exchange for a rock-solid agreement to drop the lawsuit against Solveig and never divulge anything said at the conference, Shale was given an hour to question the former provost. He, in turn, agreed to answer Shale's questions honestly. Looking at his enemy across the wide wooden table, Shale was pleased to see how old and worn out the former provost looked. He answered Shale's questions in a tired voice, devoid of any hope. Shale didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. When Shale asked him how it all started, Solveig told him that he first succumbed to temptation when a doctoral student offered him sex in exchange for a scholarship. The woman was both attractive and highly motivated, and before Solveig could respond, she was already pleasing him. He really liked it, he admitted to Shale, but he liked even more the feeling of power that her self-deprecation gave him. After this experience, Solveig realized how much leverage he had, and when the next attractive female applicant came to him, he didn't wait for her to propose to him. When he laid out his terms, she didn't even object. Everything was going smoothly until Magnus Jefferson unexpectedly walked into Eric's office one evening and found him in the middle of making love with an adjunct professor. After the embarrassed young woman ran away, Solveig told Shale that he expected to be fired immediately. Jefferson demanded to know everything about Solveig's little sexual affairs. When he finished, the president shocked Eric by declaring that he also wanted to take part in the game. "But no one ever refused or threatened to tell anyone?" Shale asked. Solveig looked at him like he was an idiot. "Who would take the word of a needy academic against a university president?" he asked contemptuously. "Besides, these people were desperate, and we had what they needed: degrees, titles, scholarships, whatever. No one said no. In fact, many considered it a fair exchange." Shale couldn't help but curl his lips in disdain. But he had one more question. "What I really want to know is what leverage you had over Sylvia. How did you get her to become Jefferson's mistress?" Solveig shook his head. "We didn't have to offer her anything. She came to him herself." Shale could only stare at Solveig and clench his fists. He wanted the truth, and now he got it. Was he satisfied? No, but the two people he was most angry with were out of reach. He decided he didn't want to think any more about the emasculated man sitting in front of him. Solveig faced only a life of shame and torment. Without a word, Shale pushed his chair away from the table and left the room. It was time to let it go. A few days later, Perry Ryan found Shale cleaning out his office. "So you're really leaving," he said. "I thought that with the change in administration, maybe you would stay." "No," said Shale. "The university wanted me to leave and paid handsomely for it. To be honest, I want to leave myself too many bad memories here. But what about you, Perry? What are your plans?" "I'm staying. The settlement Camille and I got paid off all our student loans, so life is a lot easier now." Shale glanced at him surreptitiously as he continued packing. "What about your marriage? Will everything be okay after everything that happened?" Perry responded quickly. Of course, it's all in the past. Everything is fine between me and Camilla." The memory of the last time he saw Camilla came to Shale's mind, but he suppressed the image. "Okay, Perry, I'm glad to hear that," he said. "So you found a new job at another university?" Perry continued. "No," Shale said. "I'm now a toxic commodity to the big universities. And frankly, I don't think I would have accepted a contract if one of them had offered me one. I've had my fill of academic life for the rest of my life." "So what are you going to do? Live for your own pleasure?" "No, I will continue my research. I plan to use the money from the settlement to finance my own geological expedition." Perry looked at him curiously, so Shale pulled the bound copy of his dissertation out of the box. "Remember my hypothesis about variations in the forces that formed the continents? These variations help explain why different types of rocks and minerals are distributed unevenly across the globe." "Of course I remember," Perry said. "And what?" Shale smiled. "In the past, people have stumbled upon ores and mineral deposits by chance. But I think I can use my theory to predict where to look for certain valuable minerals in places that haven't been looked for before." Perry looked at him skeptically. "Are you going to look for gold?" "No, but something just as valuable, europium. Europium is a rare earth element that adds the red color to TV screens and computer monitors. It has many other possible uses, but it is rare and only found in such small concentrations that it cannot be mined and requires significant processing. Currently, the largest known deposits are in China. But if my hypothesis is correct, I think I can find a new deposit of europium with a much richer concentration of the element." "Still sounds like a gold dig," Perry said with a smile. "So how long do you expect to be on the expedition?" "I plan to be there 6 months," Shale replied. The other man shook his head doubtfully. "Well, I wish you luck, but I wouldn't want to do something like that. Sounds like a hard, lonely life." Shale smiled. "Oh, I don't think I'll be too lonely." Shale carefully descended from the rocky ledge. The moon gave him good light, but he didn't want to step on loose rock, or, worse, one of the poisonous reptiles that came out to hunt after the heat of the sun subsided. "Finally, I was able to get a signal," he said when he reached their fire. "The helicopter will pick us up in the morning to take us to the next test site. Oh," he added, "I also received a message from Anika. She's back from her honeymoon and wanted to wish us luck." He sighed and looked at Mosa. "I still think she made a terrible mistake by going back to Robert. I don't know how she can trust him after what he did." Mosa shrugged. "I agree, but love makes people do crazy things." Hearing this, Shale couldn't help but think of his last year with Sylvia. Mosa saw his reaction and immediately knew what he was thinking. She quickly approached him. "Oh, Shale, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to remind." "No, everything is okay," Shale said, hugging her waist. "Sometimes something reminds me of those bad times, but it doesn't happen often. Honestly, I'm happy now." The young woman pulled him closer to her and coquettishly asked, "And what makes you so happy, Professor Stevens?" He smiled warmly at her. "First of all, I'm very glad to be here with you," he said, gently stroking her firm buttocks. Mosa giggled. "And secondly, I'm glad to be as far away from any ivy-covered walls as possible." Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.